Hey, check your power steering fluid.
That whining noise you're hearing is from the vehicle's power steering pump. Doesn't necessarily mean that the pump itself is bad. Well, at least not yet. Let's get into it. Make sure you order all the parts that you need from oneauto.com, shipped fast and free. Hey friends, it's Len here from One Auto. So we've all heard whining noise coming from a vehicle, whether you're in it driving or one's driving by you. Most modern day vehicles have a hydraulic power steering pump, meaning the pump itself has a specific hydraulic fluid in it, and its job is to circulate pressurized fluid through the power steering lines and then down to that power steering rack. This gives you assistance and ease when attempting to steer your vehicle, especially at lower speeds. And I said most because some vehicles are actually going to have electric power steering assist, which typically means it's going to have an electric motor directly attached to that power steering rack, in which case it's not hydraulic. With that said, you really shouldn't hear a whine, unless of course it's a different type of whine, and that could be from your transmission fluid, but that's a different story altogether. Since we're talking about the power steering system, I don't only want to mention that you will get a power steering whine. There's other symptoms you might happen to find if you happen to have an issue with the power steering system. Some of the symptoms that you might happen to find if you are having an issue with your power steering system could include, of course, you would have a whining noise coming from the power steering system. You might find that you have a leak dripping down on the ground. While you're driving, you might find that you lose your steering assist. It just feels really hard to turn it. Or even, it feels like it's easy to turn, and then it's hard, and then it's easy, and then it's hard. Shuddering. Any of these is a bad symptom, and you definitely want to check it out. Now with that said, why would your hydraulic power steering system be making a whining noise? Typically it's due to air in the power steering pump mixing with the fluid, causing a lot of little air bubbles and throwing off the balance of the vanes and the shaft inside of the pump. If left like this, it can cause damage to the inside of your hydraulic power steering pump, especially if it's left like this for a long period of time. When this internal wear happens, you will always have pump noise and your steering assist will be weak because the pump cannot provide the optimal amount of hydraulic pressure. If you get air inside of your power steering system, you're going to find that you have a whining noise. So now let's talk about parts that could potentially leak. The first place that I would always look would be the power steering cooler. It's common to have some sort of external power steering cooler along the front of the vehicle someplace, generally along where the radiator is behind your grille. Now these are going to be made out of metal. They're right out in the front, exposed to all the elements. So if you live in an area that's humid or has a lot of snow or something the like, it's going to accumulate on the area and it's going to make it rust or even rot over time. When this happens, the metal is going to get weak and potentially seep, or even worse, start to leak out some fluid. The next thing that I would want to talk about would be your power steering lines. These are generally going to be what transfers the fluid from your power steering pump all the way down to the power steering rack. There could be other miscellaneous things, such as maybe that power steering cooler, which we already talked about. These lines are going to be made out of metal and out of rubber. Of course, the metal areas, you can imagine what happens. We talked about it with the cooler. It gets wet, it sits on there, it makes it rust and potentially seep. Other than that, on the flexible hose itself for those power steering lines, there's going to be a little coupler that holds the rubber to the metal. That area tends to seep. It's very common. I've seen it a lot. If you find a leak on one of your hoses, it's a good idea to just replace them both. Now I mentioned the power steering rack. That's generally going to be mounted to a frame of some sort, and it's going to have those two power steering lines leading to it. Now the power steering rack generally doesn't have very many places it's going to leak overall, but the couple places that you will find leak on it will either be where the lines go in, or down behind the bellows boots, pretty close to those inner tie rod ends. There should be a seal inside of each side of that. And when the rack turns side to side on the inside, the seal is supposed to grip on there and make sure no fluid makes it by. Overall, if the fluid was to be contaminated, or if somehow that bellows boot was torn in some way, it might get some sort of debris onto the seal, make it swell or even tear, and then you're going to find that you have power steering fluid making its way into the bellows boot. You might not even see this. Commonly, the bellows boot's going to be made out of rubber. Now, if that rubber was to hold in all the fluid, I've seen it before, you don't even think you have a leak. Where's the fluid going? The fluid's low inside the reservoir there, but you don't see a leak dripping on the ground. Generally, you just go over to those bellows boots, you can pop them right off of the power steering rack, there should be a clamp or two, slide it away. When you do that, if you see a whole bunch of fluid come pouring out of there, that means that your power steering rack is no good. I should also mention, when you pull off that bellows boot, if you happen to see just a couple drops of power steering fluid in there, it's not necessarily the end of the world. But if you see something that looks like this, you're going to need to replace that power steering rack. Now let's move along to talking about the power steering pump. There's really only one place on the power steering pump that's going to potentially leak, and that's along where the shaft seal is. It's kind of hard to see. Of course, where that seal is, you're going to have a big old pulley in front of it, and that's where your serpentine belt's going to be located. Like I said, it's very hard to see the seal that's located behind it, but generally if you can make your way from underneath and take a peek, you're going to be able to see some fluid coming down from there. Now we finished talking about areas that I would look for if I was looking for a power steering fluid leak. But let's talk about other reasons why your power steering system might want to whine. So aside from having a leak, the inside of your power steering pump might actually be damaged. Maybe you had a leak at one time, or maybe you have contaminated fluid. On the inside of the pump, you're going to have several vanes that are supposed to rotate while the power steering pump pulley is spinning. That's going to create the pressure inside of your power steering system. If you had a leak at one point or contaminated fluid, those vanes could be worn down or damaged in some way. When this happens, you're going to find that you have poor circulation. The steering might feel a little stiff overall, and of course, you might even get some whining noise coming from that pump. Now, I talked about having contaminated fluid. There's always the possibility that maybe you had low power steering fluid. You went out to a store and you got yourself power steering fluid, but you didn't really pay attention to what type. Different manufacturers will have manufacturers specified fluids that they want you to use. By adding the wrong fluid to your power steering system, there's the possibility that the fluids just don't mix properly. Different fluids have different densities. When this happens, the pump might find that it has an easy time spinning and then a hard time spinning. This is going to throw off the balance of everything and potentially cause some internal damage and/or power steering noise. Let's move along to talking about fluid restrictions. Now, it's less common to have a restriction in your power steering system, unless of course you had some sort of contaminated fluid in there and it made the hose itself swell. When it swells, it's going to get weak over time. Now, like I said, the power steering system is a pressurized system. The pump creates that pressure and circulates it through the entire system. By causing fluid pressure on one side, it's causing vacuum on the other. If on that vacuum side, the hose was weak and collapsing, it's going to cause a restriction. The pump's not going to be able to circulate the fluid properly, and you're going to get a whining noise. Aside from that, maybe you're doing some work underneath the vehicle and you happen to dislodge one of those power steering lines. When that happens, it could potentially move around, put a crimp in the metal for the power steering line, or even put a bend in the hose for the power steering line to the point that the fluid's restricted. And any of these things could potentially cause the whine coming from your power steering system. Okay friends, so I gave you a whole bunch of reasons why you might potentially have a whining sound coming from your power steering system. Of course, you might have experienced this. Maybe you've got a story of your own. If you've got something to say, leave it in the comments section below because I always love to hear from you. If you like the video or even love the video, go ahead and smash on the like button for me. It would mean the world. While you're at it, go ahead and subscribe, ring the bell. That way there you, all of your friends, can be kept up with all of our latest content. Thanks. Power steering rack. Wow, short and sweet. But you're probably going to have there's a lot of probablys. Let's get rid of a probably or two. Now I should all admit, hi, I'm the lamp talking.